and give a little introduction to our first speaker, who's going to be talking about food waste at the retail level. So Kate Leadbeater is the Chief Marketing Officer at FlashFoods. If you haven't already used the FlashFoods app, it was launched in 2018. Since then, it has made near-date groceries an affordable source of healthy food for families at more than 1,600 grocery stores across North America, while saving more than 65 million pounds of food from landfills across the country. So thank you, Kate, for joining us today. I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, my absolute pleasure to be here. And thanks, Robert. And thanks, Melanie, for being our Zoom host. And excited also to hear from Anne-Marie. And good morning, everyone. Can everyone see my screen? We're good on that front? Okay, wonderful. Then we can talk a little bit more, building on some of the introduction that Robert provided, the issue of food waste, which is just so significant, I think, than many of us often realize. So Robert mentioned this, but 30 to 40% of food in North America is wasted. I'm actually based in Canada, and if it does make you feel any better, we actually waste more of our percentage of food in Canada than it does in than you do in the United States, where our number is actually over 50%. But in any case, these are really enormous numbers, and it is the number one component taking up space inside U.S. landfills. So largest source of U.S. methane emissions, which we know are a massive contributor to climate change. So when we think about the climate change problem, which is all really tied up in this question of healthy communities and, how do we thrive together, both on the nutrition side and also on the climate side, we recognize that food waste is the number one solution to the climate crisis. So coming above electric cars, solar power, plant-based diets, the sheer impact that we could have by reducing food waste is enormous on the climate problem. And of course, the climate problem and the food waste problem are intricately connected also to the problem of hunger that we have, with 1 in 8 Americans, receiving nutrition assistance. We know that particularly during the pandemic, this is a big problem for folks. And as grocery prices continue to rise, affordability and access to fresh food is a huge issue. And 15% of North Americans are experiencing food insecurity. So excited to talk to you about what that means at retail and what we're doing over here at Flashfood and what some other considerations are. So if we focus specifically on retail, so when you think of retail, all stores that are part of selling food within our communities, you recognize that there's a really complex operational system behind this world of grocery stores that we rely on day to day. Lots of different dynamics. There are consumers, there's supply chain, there, all of the operational considerations. And consumer purchase behavior is part of the dynamic that encourages some of this waste to occur at retail. And so just to kind of dig into that a little bit, the way that attention works for us when we are in the store requires grocers to overstock shelves and to showcase really abundance. And, when you think about the shelf of bananas at the grocery store, where, you almost have a hard time finding a yellow one because you've got all of these green bananas, like overwhelming this massive display. And you really never will find, or not often will find, a banana getting to its ripest point on that display shelf within the grocery store, right? Because the grocer recognizes that freshness and the appearance of freshness in the products that they share and they stock is a huge differentiator and a huge reason why a consumer may choose a grocery store. Oh, I get the freshest products here. I get the freshest produce here. So consumers really index hard on wanting to have the freshest and most recent items available to them in these sort of abundant displays. There's also the question of expiry dates. And honestly, we could spend the entire session talking about this. And I'm not sure if Anne-Marie will go into a little bit more detail, but suffice it to say, the system of dating on foods is one that is also contributing to some of the problems here. So consumers often believing that best before dates are actually safety dates. I know we have this discussion with my husband, who's very, When the date is passed, the item goes out, whereas I, working a little bit more closely in this space, am a bit more attuned to the fact that really we need to use our five senses when we look at something to determine if it's still good to eat. And often those dates are really, suggestions and ballparks, and except for a few select items, contribute to the problem of food waste. And my husband among them, 80% of consumers reporting that they're discarding food prematurely. So lots of dimensions, and the consumer playing an important role at what happens at retail. I love this meme because I think it also captures the essence of how we find ourselves at the grocery store. And, even me, I do it, especially on spring mix. I really dig to the back to find the latest date on that. And that's, part of what consumers are doing in the store when they're looking to purchase items and doing their regular grocery shops. So what this means for grocers themselves, right? In the grocery business, it's a business with very thin margins, generally huge operational pressures. And we saw that across COVID with all of the supply chain challenges that they faced. This is a problem for them from a business perspective. It's a problem for them from a community perspective, from an employee morale perspective. The retail loss of food waste is massive. So $37 billion of perfectly good food thrown out by US grocers and retailers. An average, large format grocery store is estimated to throw out $5,000 to $10,000 worth of food a week. So these are really big numbers. And this is in the context of all the existing programs that the grocers already run and have run for decades. And so it's not as though, there hasn't been an effort to tackle this through a number of community-based and other operational programs where, even industrial composting and different solutions that are being brought forward. But of course, what we would like to see done is we would like this food to go to people most of all, when the food is still, good and delicious to eat, if not, at its peak for marketability. So where does that bring us to in terms of the solutions that we would love to bring forward? Well, the first thing that I will acknowledge with a quote from our founder at Flashfood over here, saying it takes a village to solve the problem. And so Flashfood is part of an ecosystem of solutions that need to exist in order to solve this problem at retail. So, want to put an emphasis there that we work alongside all kinds of different solutions across the supply chain to try and really optimize to close this gap on this $37 billion problem. So in terms of the role that we play, Flashfood is a mobile marketplace that reduces retail food waste happening specifically in grocery stores by connecting shoppers with food that's nearing its best by date. So when we think about some of these highly perishable items that are in the grocery store and the operational processes that take place, grocers are typically in the morning routine, going through the store, looking for items that are, getting too close to their best before date, or produce that is starting to show its age, taking those out, and often that they are going out the back door in what we would call shrink. That is the sort of industry term for products that are going to landfill or to industrial composting in some cases, because there simply is not the time or the logistical manpower to get them anywhere else. And that is the solution that the grocers are relying on. So that's really the slice of this problem that Flashfood looks to address with our solution. So we really focus on highly perishable items that are really at that kind of delicate balance, coming to their best before date and really kind of at the end of the window for saleability, but still very delicious to enjoy. And one of the things that I liken this to a little bit is, in our household, we call it fridge management, but you look inside the fridge and you're sort of like, okay, what is the thing that I've got to eat today, or that I'm making for dinner based on the things that you've got? And I know Anne-Marie's going to give us some great tips about that, but really the food that you get from Flashfood is no different than the item that you bought 3 days ago from the grocery store that's coming up on its best before date the next day. And you're like, okay, I need to make some plans around eating this tonight. And so really highly perishable items, primarily meat, seafood, dairy, baked goods, which it turns out a number of these items are really also very highly nutritious items and healthful items, right? That are otherwise resulting in landfill or industrial composting. So what shoppers are able to do is they're able to download a free app. It's on iPhone, it's on Android. They can browse the products from home that are available. And so this is a real game changer on the clearance rack, because we know that grocers leverage a clearance rack it hasn't solved the problem. It still persists as a solution in many places, but they don't move a huge volume of product through a clearance rack where, you know, you've got the enjoy tonight and various items that are appearing there. And one of the key reasons is that you don't know what's on the rack until you're in the grocery store. And so you have no ability to look at the stores around you and sort of think to yourself, okay, well, what are my kids going to eat? And what are the dietary restrictions I need to work with, or the preferences? And we know how much work goes into meal planning and how challenging it is to feed everybody in the family. And so the ability for consumers to be at home or at work to sort of see at a UPC level, and so like at an item level, what are the items available and what are the best before dates, to select those items, to buy them, and then to pick them up at their convenience, has just made a huge difference from a consumer perspective in terms of the logistics that they're able to overcome in order to get these items, pick up these items. And it also means, because they're getting them directly from the store, that there's no additional layer of logistics that needs to happen. So that banana that's kind of on the edge, or that's getting to, you know, getting close to needing to be used, can be picked up directly by the consumer. So in terms of the impact that Flashfood has had to date, just to kind of connect the dots on the environmental side, we've saved shoppers over $170 million on their grocery bills. And, you know, in this economy, it's really a significant savings for folks who are looking to make a dollar stretch, which is 65 million pounds of food diverted from landfill, which is the equivalent from a CO2 perspective of 95 million pounds of emissions. So these are significant numbers. The food waste problem is significant, and we're just scratching the surface of what is possible here. But in terms of where you can find us, you know, we're continuing to expand, but you'll see perhaps some grocery brands that you recognize here in this list of logos on the right, and are excited to continue to expand our availability across the US. We're mostly in the Northeast and Midwest as it stands right now, but you'll maybe see, if you look us up, that we just expanded to Rochester, New York this morning, and have got lots of announcements coming in terms of our future availability. So reducing waste does create healthier communities, not only because we're able to feed people more affordably and make sure that this food actually goes to the folks who can enjoy it instead of to landfill or industrial composting, but the environmental impact really can't be overstated in terms of the amount of, Robert talked about some of the inputs, water foremost among them, that are being contributed in the production of this food. So just wanted to call that out. And that 2/3 of the food would be otherwise lost could be redirected to human consumption. And so really that's what we at Flashfood want to do, is make sure that this food is enjoyed and shared around the dinner table, as opposed to kind of going down the list of other ways that we might be able to solve that problem. So that's what I had to share with you today, and wanted to make sure that I stayed on my timing here, which I think I have mostly done. But excited to hear from Anne-Marie, and welcome any questions that you have when we get to the Q&A.
Great. Thank you so much, Kate. That is a great introduction. And I've got to say, having looked at a lot of environmental projects and programs over the years, the ability of Flashfood to scale up in the way that you have been, it's truly amazing. So I'm really looking forward to more participation in New England. I'll probably be one of your first New England customers. So, this is a great introduction for Anne-Marie Bonneau. And as I mentioned, she is known as being the author for the Zero Waste Chef, an amazing book that did its rounds around my office, and everyone was just reading it with delight. Of course, Anne-Marie is an avid zero waste chef at home. She shares her wisdom on her website, Zero Waste Chef, and on Instagram with a lot of great photos and great pieces of advice as well. So let's hear from Anne-Marie about what she knows at home as being a chef at home, and how it will work with zero waste. So thank you for joining us, Anne-Marie.
Oh, thank you, Rob. Thank you, Melanie, for having me. And that was a great presentation, Kate. I learned a lot, and I'm obsessed with this topic. So yeah, I'm going to talk about what you can do at home. Some simple tips. So the first one is tweak your shopping routine. So we're going to talk about where to shop and what to buy. There's a fabulous place to shop. It's very convenient, it's close to you, and it's super affordable. And that is your refrigerator. So most of us, when we were taught to cook, if we were taught to cook, we were told, look up a recipe that looks tasty, jot down all of the ingredients, go to the store, buy the ingredients, come home, prep the dish, cook the dish, put the leftover bits away in the fridge and the leftovers. Well, if you do that a few times a week, you're going to have a big pile of food in the refrigerator, and chances are some of that is going to go to waste. So flip that on its head and let the contents of your refrigerator dictate what you're going to cook next. So look at what you have on hand in the fridge, look at what other perishable food you have. Check out the freezer. I freeze lots of food. That's another way to prevent food waste. And you don't have to deep freeze stuff for 6 months. You know, last week I made a big vat of soup. And when I realized, okay, we're not going to finish all of this off, I put a little bit in a couple of jars, put that in the freezer. And this week I took that out and now I'm eating the rest of that. And I freeze all kinds of stuff. So in the left hand picture, in the very top, I have frozen apple peels and cores, and I use that to make scrap vinegar. Tofu, when you freeze it and thaw it, has this really nice meaty texture. And I use wide mouth glass jars to freeze everything. I can see what's in there at a glance, and if you can see it, you'll eat it. So the freezer is your friend. And then, you know, look at what else is on hand. Bread, there's so many things you can do with bread. You might actually want a little bit of stale bread on hand. So you can make French toast, croutons, breadcrumbs, which are great to fill something like a veggie burger, or make eggplant parmesan. Mystery grains are great for throwing into a pot of soup. If you have a few tablespoons of rice, you're not going to want to heat up a whole pot of water and, you know, make rice, cook it for 20 minutes, but it's perfect for soup. So throw it into soup. Okay, after you have gone through your pantry and your refrigerator and your freezer, and you've thought of a couple of things you might want to eat, what should you buy? Well, that depends on what you found when you did your inventory. So what can you make with what's on hand? If you've watched the show Chopped, you're kind of doing that, what the contestants do, except you don't have the mean judges and there's no timer. So think about what you can make with what's on hand. Do you need anything else to make it? Plan 1 or 2 more meals, or if you're the type of person that wants to break out the spreadsheet and plan an entire month of everything you're going to eat, do that, but leave a few spots for, you know, things that are going to come up. What can you do with any leftover ingredients? So when I'm cooking, I kind of think of myself as my own sous chef. I try to think ahead, and I think, okay, what can I make that I can use in my next dish? So you're not always starting from scratch. So let's say I make a stir fry. Well, maybe I'll make extra peanut sauce. I love peanut sauce on my stir fry, that I'll eat later with as a dip for something. And I'll make extra rice, and then maybe the next day we'll have fried rice, and maybe the day after that we'll have some rice pudding. So if I have some components already prepped, then it makes cooking faster, and I'll use up all of those ingredients. All right, after you've done all that, then make your list and go shopping, and use the Flashfood app because it looks really awesome. I'm going to download it right after this. Another thing to do, cook like grandma. So freestyle cooking, that is what I call where you look at what you have and you think, okay, what can I make with this? If you have some really simple, basic dishes you can make that are highly variable, you will absolutely slash your food waste. One thing I love to do is roast vegetables. So these are the components of ratatouille, minus the tomatoes. They couldn't fit in the photo. if you roast vegetables, it brings out the flavor. It's a really easy way to make sure you eat all of the vegetables. I like to cut them up into bite-sized pieces and roast them on separate trays because they all roast at different times. You can eat them as is. You can puree them into a soup. You can throw them in a frittata. You can throw them in a galette, throw them in a sandwich. There's just so much you can do with roasted vegetables. And on the left here, this is some homemade pasta I made out of leftover pumpkin puree. I cook whole sugar pie pumpkins in a pressure cooker to get the pureed pumpkin for pumpkin pies and pumpkin bread and all the pumpkin things. And I had some left over, so I made pasta with it. And then I needed pesto to go with that. I had roasted a fennel bulb, and at my farmer's market, you can actually get the fennel fronds for free because people don't want them a lot of the time. So they ask the farmer to chop them off. But you can eat them. They're delicious. They make really good pesto. So here, this pesto had fennel fronds and parsley, some walnuts, olive oil, garlic. I'm not sure if I put cheese in that one or not. Cheese or nutritional yeast. And scraps are food, just as weeds are plants. So I put, this is a recipe in my book. It's for sauteed Swiss chard. And I wanted to put that in there because I think, okay, I don't have the numbers. Kate might have the numbers for this, but I think leafy greens have to be one of the most wasted foods because we buy them, we want to eat healthy, and then we put them in the refrigerator and pretty quickly they go limp. But also, you can eat all of the parts. So when you cut out the ribs, chop those up and saute them first, along with some garlic before you add the greens, and you'll eat the whole vegetable. These are some other examples of things I do with food scraps. On the left, this is homemade vegetable broth. I haven't bought broth for over a decade. And I just save all of my scraps when I'm prepping vegetables. So I save the little bits of celery and onions and carrots. And I store them in the freezer. And when I have enough and I need broth, I pull them out. I simmer them in just enough water to cover, simmer for maybe 20 minutes, strain, and I have this delicious broth. You see here, it's really good. And I know went into it and it's free. There's zero downside to reducing food waste. There's none. I've never thought of one unless you only buy cookies and then, you have some other things you have to work on. Next to that is my limoncello, which is delicious. It's a little bit dangerous. It's delicious, really easy to make. So I peel lemons with a vegetable peeler. You don't want to peel any of the pith. Steep that in vodka for at least 4 days, maybe a little longer. Depends on, usually I get busy with other things and I neglect it. And strain that and then add the simple syrup to it, store it in the freezer, and you have homemade limoncello. Makes a nice gift. Oh, my scrap vinegar. So I talked about my apple peels and cores that I save in the freezer. When I have enough, I ferment them. And you just stuff the peels and the cores in a jar, add a little spoonful of sugar and cover that with water. Stir it every stir it every day for several days. And the bacteria on the fruit peels, they eat the sugars in the fruit and in the sugar that you put in, and they excrete acids and gases and they ferment the concoction and it turns slightly alcoholic after about a week. Let it sit for another week and it turns into vinegar. And that is my free vinegar. And this that's in my book and on my blog. This is paneer next to it. So my daughter, she worked in a cafe and for some reason they bought too much milk. And she brought home 3 cartons of milk. And it was close to, or maybe actually I think it was past the date, but it was fine. I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. And so I made paneer, which is cheese, super easy, You heat the milk, you add an acid, you get curds, you strain it and you press it, and you get that delicious cheese. Ricotta is similar. And here is some homemade pasta. My daughter made that with radish green tops. She cut those off. She steamed them, pureed them, added them to the pasta dough. This is good for St. Patrick's Day. And it was absolutely delicious. So, you know, I'm always looking at everything as a resource and thinking, okay, what can I make with this? And it makes cooking more fun. And, you know, it's like a puzzle. And the food is more delicious. I eat more delicious food now that I am obsessed with cutting all of the waste, because that kind of creativity, or those kind of parameters bring out your creativity. And next to that, that is candied orange peel, which is delicious. And again, you use a vegetable peeler, you peel the pith off, peel the skin off, not the pith, and you cook it with sugar and water until it crystallizes. It's delicious. It tastes like a grown-up gummy drop or gumdrop or gummy bear, but with like actual orange flavor. Oh, fermentation. So I'm obsessed with fermentation. It's absolutely delicious. It's so good for you. It's great for your gut, and it prevents food waste. So these lemons on the counter, if I let them sit for a while, let's say a few weeks, they would get mushy and moldy and rot, and I'd have to compost them. But if I cut them, stuff them with salt, stuff them in a jar, and cover them with lemon juice, let them sit for, let's say, a couple of weeks for Meyer lemons, a month for Eureka, then I get absolutely delicious preserved lemons, which are really expensive to buy if you can find them. And those keep in the refrigerator. I moved them to the refrigerator after they fermented. They keep for well over a year. I have a jar in the fridge from last year and they're just fine. Same thing with kimchi. That's my homemade kimchi. And I stuff the Napa cabbage, daikon radish, the spice, gochugaru, salt, stuff that in a jar and let it sit for a few days, and it's fermented and it's addictive. It's delicious and it's so inexpensive to make. Oh, and this is my sourdough. So I'm a little bit obsessed with sourdough, and I've been making sourdough since before everyone started making sourdough. So sourdough is another type of fermentation. On my starter on the left, her name is Eleanor. She turned 9 years old last month. And a starter just contains flour and water, and the microbes in the flour and in the air and on your hands that get in the jar, they eat the carbohydrates and they excrete gases and acids, and you get all of this wonderful yeast to make the bread, which is on the right. That contains flour, water, and salt. That's it, because the starter is just flour and water. You get this absolutely amazing bread. Every time I pull a loaf out of the oven, I think, how can this be? This is just flour, water, and salt. One ingredient I get from the tap. Sourdough bread, it stays fresh longer than bread made with active dry yeast, and it'll stay fresh for about a week, and it's absolutely delicious. And I think that's it. And so I have these recipes either in my book or on my blog, and that's it. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Oh my goodness, I love the photos that you include, and I feel that they help to activate my consciousness and bring up my lost skills around tackling food waste. So just thank you for that. That's really great.